if you're talking about how you think the world works, look, and two people can have two different models and they can both do adequately well. It's not like one person is right, but you know that you're in the right direction, that if you can explain things that have happened and you can predict things that will happen. And time always is, you're going to be your friend or your foe with your forecast. So forecasting well, like just in my experience, having, I haven't destroyed my reputation on forecast. I think it could be easy to do. It's tempting because there's a lot of things people want you to weigh in on. It's like, yeah, but that's the $64,000 question. But there are things that are, I think, foreseeable enough, like I would venture to say that Zelensky is all in, like his solution is to stay in until the very end. And that's the only way that maybe the war could expand and then he has more time. But he's in it until the end. He has some plan to, to negotiate his out, but if he's too much of a war criminal or it becomes too important for the Russians in terms of like, if it becomes personally about Zelensky as this war unfolds and he needs to be, brought to trial or something, but he's living in England or living in Poland, I don't know,
Yeah, it's definitely important to hold in mind the two coexistent modes of analysis at the same time. A lot of people, they tend to get too locked into all one or all the other. And I'm talking here about, the first principles way of thinking about the totally top-down grand strategy, which is super important. But at the same time, you don't want to do it at the expense of being able to properly appreciate the mechanisms, the nuance, what we don't know, right? And be able to really process that with a degree of uncertainty, right? Because a lot of people, they don't like uncertainty. They get very uncomfortable. They want that right formula. They want they memorize the foil, right? They know the tricks that they were trained but to follow the rules to get to pass the test. And it's really unhealthy at the end of the day because the reality doesn't work according to just fixed rules. So to be able to sort of, like, I know in the back of my mind that the only ultimate quality of a durable solution would involve the abandonment of the paradigm that got us into this crisis, which involves the idea of full spectrum dominance, a protocol or a doctrine that would or that has persuaded a number of very insane geopolitical grand strategists over decades and decades to think that they could expand and encircle Russia, China, anybody who could possibly threaten the hegemon, with the idea that it would be impossible to properly retaliate from a nuclear first strike. So you got to abandon that. Now, however that's going to look, we know that that's the eventual form that it's going to take, is the abandonment of that doctrine and the reassertion of something much more reasonable. We are many degrees removed from that. So like, it's difficult when people throw this question to me, and I'm guessing you probably share that too. Like, how will the peace process unfold in Ukraine? How will they derail, or how will they get off this commitment to war using Ukraine as a proxy? How will Europe become reasonable? Well,
yes, it's when you really think about where the United States is at and how they have positioned themselves, like at least in their branding and their diplomatic approach to Russia, and with some results. It's not all paper mache. They are very, very different in their attitude towards the Russians compared to the Europeans. It would seem to me that there must be an I think maybe it's just my own maybe lapse or area of ignorance on having like complete portfolios on enough of the characters in leadership in the EU or in Brussels or in the kind of the NATO structures that are built into their Atlantic Council politics and so forth. Because it's really obvious that they are smashing Europe into the ground through this policy. And it's pretty clear that it's going to hurt Germany the most. It's hurting Germany the most now. It's going to hurt France, the second most. And it's so interesting that the British are like leading the charge against Russia, but they're in the best position to like flip around to the American position if things go however. I mean, it could, if things go how they want, I mean, it could be the British plot to push the Europeans to smash them on the rocks of Russia, and for them at the convenient time to back out. If the conflict is going on, like hypothetically, and I know this is like this is supposes a lot, and there's a lot of reasons why it may not be realized that are practical, but just imagine over the next 2-3 years, the conflict isn't over, and France and Germany have increased their drone production, tank production, shell production, things like this, you know, not enough to win, but enough to create a longer conflict that goes on another 3 or 4 years beyond 2 or 3 years from now. You follow? Those might be the opportunities that they're banking on building towards, like 7 or 8 years down the line. But because they're bent on, they are so clear in their mind that, and I'm saying at the very top level, that Russia has to be broken apart into different countries, right? Like if they can't break Russia apart into different countries, like that is their main fixation. And for them, that needs to be done to contain, that has to be done to contain China. So they basically have understood for 50, 60 years that Russia and China together, you know, unbeatable, like unbreakable. But if you can capture one, and those, that can mean different things. I mean, for a long time following the détente with China and the, you know, the famous meeting of Nixon and Mao and so forth, even though, of course, it was like under the leadership of the Dengists, and it wasn't necessarily the wrong thing to do. They became major manufacturer of increasingly more sophisticated things for the West and for the world, Africa, Latin America. So it's not just for the West, but the West, you know, definitely offshored its production of a lot of stuff to a socialist country to sustain global capitalism. And so that kind of metric is very interesting in how that split the Chinese from the Soviets at that time. That's very interesting because that approach at the time seemed to have worked in terms of like keeping the Western alliance on a lifeline of Chinese, you know, socialized, planned, centralized economic labor that kept the northern, you know, so-called free market, so-called capitalist, if you even further, economies alive, right? They wouldn't exist without China. So yet they seem to understand that that with Russia, that China cannot be moved. So the debate for a long time had been like, do you try to contain or damage or in some way manipulate China or to Russia, you know, as your way in to crack this? And so now there are some very dangerous people, in my opinion. I don't know if they're playing a script, but when you get people on the committee of the present danger part 2, China, it's like the worst sequel I've ever seen. And sequels usually are, but I mean, their fixation on Taiwan and China is just absurd. But you know, you could see if that was a psyop against mentally retarded warhawks, it could be. It could be a psyop against mentally retarded warhawks. And I mean that very seriously because think about, if they really think that you're going to take on China militarily, like whenever I hear US discourse like go in the direction of like grinding on China, pressing on China, I'm like so relieved because I know it doesn't result in anything. I know it's like, it's like when they used to threaten North Korea, I'm like, oh, thank God they're not going to do, you know, because that's just like the country that would be mentioned when they weren't going to do anything about anything else. That was like the wag the dog. That was like the distraction from an inability to do something somewhere else, was like, let's focus on North Korea. That's back when China were our friends. That's back when even the James Bond movies, it was like the Chinese were on the side of the MI6 and everything. So, but culture has changed. The direction of our attitudes towards China has changed a lot. But I don't think that they really believe that they can get in. So they're Europe is definitely the odd man out, and Europe is definitely the one that's supposed to take the brunt of this. That is the story, that is the narrative. And, you know, like, I was thinking of creative ways, things that Europe could do to further consolidate, like how history books will write about it. Like if they went like further, like on, if they made like Eurovision, like the Eurovision contest, more like the European Union, like the actual like Brussels, like parliament and stuff, that would be very cool. You can have like the bearded lady. They should do a thing where they replace all the national flags, or order that every country in the EU like fly 3 flags, not 2, like the EU flag like second and their national flag third, and then like the top flag, it should be like the pedophile LGBTQ plus whatever 2A double spirit people, whatever. It should be, that's how they should brand. Like if you were like the Rothschilds, or if you were like trying to mass manipulate perception, you would, you know, kind of go like in a theatric route in the US, kind of like Handmaid's Tale. And in Europe, you would have like the bearded ladies, like with the open chest hair and stuff, whatever, like running around and, you know, smashing their country, like, you know, with like pink tanks up against the Russian front line and stuff. And just kind of take that, like you can imagine how that could, I mean, it'd be brilliant really to see if it could just be a movie or art and not like real lives on the line.
Well, based upon the trajectory of the coming out party compared to 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today, I can say that with that orientation, that trajectory, I think your forecast is probably maybe 2 years off right now. I think we can just wait.
Right, yeah.
We're about that.
I mean, but they could really distinguish themselves, really double down on ideology, because like, why would they have to do that is because in Europe, the right, whatever that means, is kind of splintered, and the kind of the more milquetoast, you know, civic business right is with European values is like a useless person, like into European politics right now, in the direction that people need to take things. I mean, it may be useful as an example of how not to be, but you do have that on the right. But then like also on the right, you have like a lot of NATO skepticism. You have a lot of opposition to the war in Ukraine and the never-ending funding of those things, and many other things about like how Brussels is structured. So that it aligns with a lot of Euroscepticism that you guys know very much about. But also, you know, remember that when Vance sort of chastised the Europeans about their lack of democracy, and was telling them that they need to not be suppressing, you know, dissident political movements, he mentioned not just the right, but the left as well. And that's very important, because there is an authentic left that is intermixed and dispersed with a lot of messed up college students and postmodern ideologies about identity and intersectionality that have, you know, are a crisis in the West, you know, the contemporary left in modernity. But there is a rank and file left as well. And I know that people on the left fight and argue all the time. And a lot of the people for a long time that are more anti-capitalist and labor oriented are just thoroughly done with the social conflict stuff, thoroughly done with the you know, culture wars and let's say the privileging of very small statistical, you know, deviance in the population in terms of some chromosomal, you know, disorder or a personal life decision or crisis leading to decisions or whatever, with the case of the proliferation of trans identity. But there are many on the left who understand what a trap that is, and understand what a waste, and worse than a waste, it's a draw, it's a sap, it's an energy waster, it's a distraction, it's divisive. It makes people on the right talk about these silly culture questions instead of talking about things I already know about that are also problems, but things that people on the left would agree with. So by putting these things front and center, they're always going to maintain this kind of left-right divide, you know, in the population. Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of forward change in that direction, like positively. Like I'm seeing how new language is being born, and like people that might identify with a certain political persuasion are more universalizing their language to be understood, you know, to be able to talk about all this phenomenon, you know, directly. I think a lot of my response to this is, like I said, the ongoing gaslighting that has been just permeating. It's just been a nonstop gaslighting. It would be naive to dismiss or to not consider that degree of gaslighting itself was not introduced to create some reaction. And it's important that we ourselves are not like polarized or trolled or, you know, seduced or pulled into that reaction.
Yeah.
One of the most dangerous things, Matt, you talk about like higher order principles and top-down ordering from higher principles. To me, I relate that to God, or, you know, God consciousness and so forth. I think it's so important to keep that focus on not just, you know, in dealing with how we're understanding the world, the patience that it requires in our conversation with other people, the openness, the candidness, the non-judgmentalness, and like comparing real effective human conversations to comparing how people talk on sitcoms or in movies, even dramas. People speak in funny ways that are not like normal, and those are a lot of our examples, like in speech. In you know, we're indoctrinated, we're raised on film, media, and culture, and it teaches us to speak kind of poorly to each other, or you know, to think that it's acceptable to be so rude and dismissive of others all the time. Like you see a lot on social media, and like the one-liners, and you want some crackers with your salt there, or whatever. People with their little smart-ass one-liners all the time, and as a result, people don't see things, make connections that they ought to make, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. No, we underestimate. I think it's difficult sometimes to judge the thing that shaped who we are subjectively, which is the culture, and it's such a part of us that we often forget that we can separate ourselves from the culture and sort of look down and see where it went wrong, who was influencing it to bring about the debilitating inability that we have suffered from to formulate moral judgments, to use language in a more thoughtful manner. And just like you pointed out too, just there's certain hot button almost programs that have been built into the zeitgeist, which when pressed upon will get certain foreseeable effects, as we've seen with the woke absurdity taken to extreme. We had that in the 1920s Germany too, right? There was a huge movement. I think Jill Biden gave this presentation, or this speech, where she was referencing how it was, you know, Germany in the 1920s was the most LGBTQ friendly part of the world at that time, and it's true in many ways when you look at what was spreading at the time, especially the confusion that emerged out of the crippling shock therapy imposed onto the German people and the breaking up of their culture during World War I and the aftermath. People went kind of crazy, and they became very susceptible to just rejecting all of the traditional values that they were told got them into the war: the belief in the nation, the belief in God, the belief in morality.
Yeah, polarized people.
Yeah, a big chunk of people went kind of crazy and went super LGBTQ, free love, everything. And then that created a very, very predictable backlash on the National Socialist extreme that was both sides, it seems from my research, were controlled by
the leadership of that was like, they were, you know, I mean, they were into it, but they didn't want it to be out of control. They wanted to put that, you know, the queer genie back in the bottle, or they wanted to put it back in the closet. They wanted to be the one with that open and close the closet door. They were the closet door keeper. You know, they were like, that's how the Nazi party, you know, dealt in the arena of gender and sexuality in Nazi Germany, is that they were the prime regulator of all what, you know, the mainstream people would consider to be like questionable or even bizarre, or, you know, even wrong for, you know, in other people's view. But I think that with it's a very good point about this kind of, I know that term gets overused and it has nothing to do with Hegel, but problem, reaction, solution. You always have to be wary that you know, look, if we're capable of articulating these, and it's not, no one's paying us to, you know, come up with it, nor are we enticed by the power, the realization that we're going to do it. Like, imagine these people, or how these people are driven, understand their psychologies. Like, if we can talk about doing one thing to provoke a reaction that's going to land people's, you know, baseline psychology X here, where we want them to be on said question. Like, if we can like talk about the ways that that's done, then there's other people that are doing it. So now, at the same time, I don't give the ruling class like God powers that they don't have, and I also question, you know, long-standing conspiracies, like ones that go beyond 2 living human generations. Like, I question how coherent that conspiracy is. Like, the organizations of the conspirators and these things continue, but as people change, you get different personalities and different approaches that change, and even different trends. Like, the thing can kind of change in a more fundamental way in time. And in thinking and understanding how the world works, like, it's almost as if there's a type of propaganda that wants us to think that they are all like mindless drones that are somehow in control of everyone else, but that they don't have any egos or personalities. In other words, that there's a plan that they've signed up for or something, and that even despite all this power, that they're going to live their lives to fulfill someone else's plan. That doesn't comport like with the level of ego that like subsists at the level of the elites that we're talking about. So, as I've long suspected, and I think holds weight, the ruling class is, the normal tendency is for them to be at war with each other, especially in times of crisis. And we're like in a time of crisis like that now. And it's been building for some time. So they also build cults. You know, the ruling class has cults that keep them together around their core beliefs and practices, which can be kind of bizarre because they're not the best people. So the things that unite them or that they abstract about are not very good, you know, abstractions. Like having a party where you bake a cake in the shape of a person is symbolic of the cannibalistic economic practices or social practices that they engage in, or if they actually eat a real person. You know, this is symbolic of their actual relationship to humanity on the planet. So if you can build those structures and those cults, you might mitigate the kind of more ego-driven, you know, war of all against all. There can be only one, you know, like in the Highlander movie. That's a lot what drives a lot of these egoists within the ruling class. So the accomplishment of things like theosophy or the Nazi cult or the CIA or Hollywood, you know, the accomplishment of those things, I'm saying in an objective way, like from Western civilization, probably allowed it to maintain its inertia and form, and, you know, until we got to this present point. You know, where it goes from now, who knows? But
all right, let's branch out. And actually, before we branch out to the questions, there's a few people who want to ask you a question. I've got the list here: Chris, Matthew, Carlos, and Monty so far in queue. Just wanted to throw out one point of observation that I made, because I am also highly concerned about the level of the anti-China crusader hawks that are plentiful. I went to a pro-MAGA conference that I spoke at a week and a half ago, and I had a conversation with somebody. I had a little book table out, and an older gentleman had looked at one of the covers that I had of Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops, volumes 1 and 2, and on volume 2 that he was looking at caught his eye. It just subtitle is "Know Your Enemy," and it had a picture of, you know, this over the top picture of Xi Jinping with hypnotic eyeballs and, like, I guess, you know, a concentration camp like system with a bunch of like indoctrinated kids holding Chinese flags. And it's so over the top. And I had a picture of like J. Edgar Hoover subtling the background.
It's like a John Birch Society.
Yeah, like I went like ultra John Birch Society, like satire, right? But the guy just saw it, and being a think tank, high level military guy who was he described how yeah, he thought we were on the same page because he's working, and he described how he's working with a certain naval war college in Rhode Island that's specializing in the oncoming, war with China and the need to split off Russia and China. And he was just going through thinking that I'm completely on his page, and he was trying to get me to come to their next event the following week. And it took a while to get to that uncomfortable place where he realized what my position was. But the level of mental, in some ways, kind of, it made me feel a bit good knowing that he's an embodiment of the type of representative who has been assigned to prepare for this oncoming split that they've gamed out in their game theory models to break off Russia from China, and then ultimately destroy China, which it's so easy for him to imagine. When I asked him, like, well, don't Russia and China have a pretty solid relationship, like a pretty solid bond of survival? In his mind, no. He's like, the Russians don't trust the Chinese. They're looking for to break free and join the U.S. Like, really that delusional. So again, I was almost like, at first I was a little very disturbed, and then afterwards I was like, this is pretty good. That's the quality of thinker that they've deployed to that type of
right. That's a good sign.
Yeah, I would say so in some ways. Now, to what degree, and we'll leave this for the dialogue process, I'm sure it'll come out. To what degree Trump is also being influenced by this? I'm in a gray area on that. I'm not totally convinced that he's on top of it and is playing the wise card. I don't know yet, but we'll see. But let me not hog this up. I do want to throw a few people at you, starting with Chris and then Matthew. Chris first. And then if you want to address my circumspection, go for it anytime you want. Chris, you there?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Joaquin. So I don't want to change the subject, but I do want to ask you, for a while it seemed like Russia was positioning itself to broker a Middle East peace process. And since the fall of Syria, that seems less likely. And now you have Trump meeting with photos of him meeting with al-Shura in Syria. And last week you made a comment, or this past week you made a comment about Shahid Bolson being on some podcast, and then the guy Kavork Almassian was on it. And so Shahid Bolson, I guess he's Muslim Brotherhood. I kind of want to hear your take on him, but at any rate, he's got this theory that the owners and controllers of global financial capital, which would largely be based out of Europe, or brokering a deal to kind of move Europe to the Middle East. And meanwhile, Syria has conceded the Golan Heights and I guess the mountaintops about 20 miles out of Damascus to Israel. It's hard to tell where this is going now. So it almost seems like Trump is in. Where do you see all this going in big picture? I almost see it like it's a.
Yeah, no, I was at the time. Am I coming through? Is my audio okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay. At the time when after October 7th, and when you had the outbreak of the attack of the IDF on Palestinian civilians, the beginning of their war on Hamas, at this time, and a number of I would say, I received some pushback from people who weren't really didn't understand what I don't think understood what I said, or they understood what I said and believed that it was not the right thing to say, or not that they disagreed with what I'm saying objectively, but that, ethically or whatever, that it wasn't the right thing to say. And what that was at the time was that a couple of things. I said a couple of things. One was that Europe and Israel is overly dependent on the West for its economy, and it exists as a settler colony. And I have never advocated the removal of 5 million Jewish people from Israel. But I don't support the Nakba. I don't support the removal of Palestinians. There's a difference, though, is that one fact has happened and the other fact that has not. So we're not comparing apples and apples. We're just talking about what are the ethics that I'm operating in on the question of Israel. So if I were like king of the world, or if like the world could just be what I like imagine, it wouldn't be that creative, because it would be like based upon the world that exists, and then problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Like, we understand that there's like counterfactual problems in there, but if I was just like beamed into power at this moment in time, like working with the givens and doing what I could, I would like to imagine that I would like recognize a Palestinian state and, you know, set it up with everything it needs to function as a Westphalian nation state with the representative at the UN and so forth, and the apartheid regime and the occupation and the genocide of Palestinians. So that's easy for me to say, because I'm like in nowhere close to power, nowhere near power. I can have all the righteous views. I'm not in the position to have to deal with a lot of bad people, or to then be a bad person myself in imagining that I'm dealing with bad people. I don't know, right? So how I have that though is like, you know, Shahid Balsan, subsequent to my talking about that, he began to talk about the same thing. I talk about that. I said that the way forward is normalization, but that normalization cannot happen until Israel recognizes Palestine. But if they recognize Palestine, then you can have normalization. But I viewed everything happening, you know, in this crisis, and I don't want to sanitize it by calling a conflict. This genocide happening upon Gaza to Palestinians has isolated Israel. And over the past 2 years, across all demographics in the West, Israel is losing support by big chunks, numbers that you see when you graph it out. So this makes it even more difficult for politicians to even say those things, like those nominal things about Israel as our ally, or, you know, or sanitize Israel's genocide. So now, but the goal, you know, has to be normalization. So the thing is that most countries in the region have that perspective, but there has been insufficient pressure on Israel to recognize Palestine. All of the countries in the region agree. They have different formulas and different ways in which they would do it, but other countries took a different path a couple of years ago and agreed to recognize Israel, which is the beginning for potential normalization, but to recognize the state. But Israel did not recognize Palestine. Anyway, but this is connected to the Abraham Accords, but it was believed that this moving forward, like once you had a diplomatic scenario in which Israel had no imaginary enemies to use as the pretext for the Palestinian buffer zone, so to speak, anyway, that normalization is the goal. Like, so I can hear, entertain, sympathize, and agree with a lot of the feeling or the history, or how a person's sense of historical justice to a certain extent, that, you know, Israel was a mistake to have been created in the first place. You know, I was born in 1978, Israel already existed. And I'm just trying to understand the world, and I can never, like, I don't know what's going on inside of the minds of Palestinians collectively, individually. I find it suspicious that none of the main English language spokespeople for the Palestinian cause are Palestinians. I think that's very bizarre. I don't understand why in the mediascape, in the like pretty decent chunk, like into the 21st century, that we don't have like a whole cast of different people, like one that can talk to the Marxist Leninists, one that can talk to the Muslims, one that can talk to the conservatives, one that can talk to the libertarians. Why don't we have more Palestinian personalities? Well, number one, a lot of them would be in the diaspora. And the thing is that a lot of them support of Palestine to be free, but in the decision they made to leave Palestine, in the group of Palestinians that live either in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, there's like this big divide. They would they would denounce those Western Palestinian spokespeople in the diaspora because they've made meaning around staying there. And I'm not saying there's no meaning, I'm saying, but they've reinforced culturally that the definition of a Palestinian must remain on the land, even if bombs are falling on you, even if the electricity is cut off, even if the IDF engages in its occasional rashes of random terrorism on Gazans. They used to call it mowing the lawn. You know, when development got too much, they would cut the grass. So, you know, we were born into this cycle. You know, how can we break this wheel, you know? And to what extent do we even know what Palestinians want, you know? Like, it's they're not people from another planet. What actually happens is you talk to them and they're individuals and they all have different ideas, and some of them are going to align with what this elected Palestinian or unelected Palestinian says or thinks. So you get into the problem of representative politics of a people that are under the jackboot number one of the IDF, and then it's like a prison gang in control of them. And doesn't mean I'm not against prison gangs. I'm not saying that they're bad guys. I'm just saying when you have an open air prison, you know, you're gonna have the prison guards, but then you're gonna have, you know, the structures within the prison that reinforce the prison exist, that are based upon the law, structures that arise organically based upon the objective structures of the prison. You know, like the prisoners arrange themselves hierarchically. Leaders of the prisoners can also sometimes know the guards and get stuff smuggled in. They might even have relationships with the security, with the prison guards or the guy who runs the prison himself. Like, so it's such a mess, you know. But what Shahid Bolson proceeded to do was to say that the Palestinian leadership should give it everything to Israel on the condition of becoming Palestinian civilians, and then to win the battle of democracy within Israel as Israeli citizens of Palestine. I didn't mean to say Palestinian civilians, I meant to say as Israeli citizens. So I don't think that, I think that is one thing that could happen. I talked years ago about the transformation of this into what the way that the Gulf monarchies and the Western so-called Palestinian activists that are more like Sunni radicals, the way that they talk about it is to they talk about it like you can just give it all to Israel and then force through the process of democratic elections. We had all this, we lived through this, people lived through this in the industrialized countries in the 20th century with socialism and communism. You're never gonna get that density. It doesn't matter if the majority of people are workers. It doesn't matter if the majority of people want social democracy. The ruling class will never give it to you. And the same thing in, like, it doesn't matter if, you know, 60% of the population of this hypothetical larger Israeli state encompassing all of Palestine, you know. So there's a lot of problems with Shahid Bolson's proposal, but not only is it bankrupt on that end, it's also, I should say, it plagiarized my own view from several years ago that I delivered on the live stream, and in particular on the subject of normalization. So he's right about the normalization equation as an outcome, but to say that the Palestinians give it all to Israel as a precursor is not something that I think is ethical for a person to recommend at all. Like, that may be what happens, right? But it's one of the things that we learned like a long time ago is that you don't go in bargaining the position that you think is what you're gonna land on. You go in like bargaining like hard your position, and you can get a better outcome, you know, than otherwise. So you don't go in like, let's have this happen, give it to Israel, and then imagine that they're going to increase the democracy in their society. Like if that was a strategy of the Palestinians articulated by Palestinians, the problem is that there's just, where is the literature coming from Arab Israelis? Like where are the Palestinian or Arab Israeli intellectuals and writers that talk about the two-state solution, or what are the perils or the trade-offs of being an Israeli Palestinian? So, but that said, I just find, look, the fact that Shahid Bolson, murdered somebody and did years in prison for it and then paid the blood money, all those things are not that interesting to me, because we're talking about the content of his ideas, not the quality of his character. I do think it's bizarre that he made his career as a white guy being a Malcolm X impersonator. Like that to me, like the whole thing is just so, Rachel Dolezal. I don't even know what it's so Sean King. I don't even know where to begin to deconstruct that one, but he's not, Talcum X or whatever you want to call, Shahid X here. I don't know why he still has his slave master's name, but
that's hilarious. And I'll just say it, like I really thoroughly don't trust this guy at all. In that video that you shared not that long ago, featuring Kevork taking down the multitude of lies embedded in that very short clip of a debate he had with an African-American socialist host.
That's right.
Might not have been as well spoken as Shahid was. He's very good at wielding words, but you could see how the African Americans, I forgot his name, Tony, or I think his name was Tony. Anyway,
Nick, was it Nick MMA or something like that?
Yeah, his position was so much more moral and reasonable, using basic human common sense, that every time he threw a refutation or a problem at Shahid based on a self-contradiction in his thesis that it's great that Assad was taken down and now we have a chance at real democracy in Syria, that peace will be somehow possible only now that you have a former head chopper, possibly not former, being legitimized, and now BlackRock is the great mediator and peacemaker. Like it was so astounding and clear in a debate context, because it's somewhat pleasurable to listen to Shahid do a rant sometimes. I find it pleasurable aesthetically, but yet when put into a context of a debate, he couldn't actually answer any question thrown at him and had to deflect like a snide politician every single time.
Everything was deflection. Everything was deflection. It was like talking about how the Palestinians should resist that bombs are dropping on their heads, and he says, "Oh, so you promote war and not diplomacy? You support conflict and war and not compromise and peace?" It's like, what? Like, no, the bombs are landing on them right now. So it's not like they're being violent. The violence is happening on them, man. So no, it's a very very strange, but it's weird because look, it's all good. People convert to like religions that are outside of their cultural sphere, and it's such a mixed bag, because they can find so much beauty and meaning in it, which like no doubt is there, but at the same time, like it comes with the baggage of like at some level they're rejecting something in their indigenous experience, but we can't actually ever exchange our indigenous experience. Like it's about fantasizing or imagining what another indigenous experience would be if you could have participated in it, because he didn't grow up in a Muslim home. He's not from a Muslim culture. He doesn't have Muslim grandparents, Muslim mom. He doesn't know the sayings like in Arabic growing up, like in the culture. And there's different cultures, but I'm just saying like any culture that could have produced Shahid Bolson as a Muslim-born Muslim. So it's all good when like people convert and stuff, but you do find like that tend to be more radicalized people. Like when people have a conversion experience as an adult, they're not that moderate in their conversion. Like they're pretty like into it. And it's I think it's a very good question, Chris, but I just like, from my opinion, when I heard him explaining when he was trying to deflect and couldn't articulate exactly how it was that the HTS of 2025 was not an exact continuation of the HTS or al-Nusra in 2015, or it would have been stronger if Nick MMA would have been able to say immediately. So you're saying that Haaretz and all the Israeli press and all of the, like, that not Iranian press, but Israeli press and other press were admitted, like, openly, the IDF is providing medical and logistical support for FSA and al-Nusra there during the conflict. So those things he kind of got away from, but I actually thought of better ways that he could have articulated his point, interestingly, because that's how I operate. Like, I was thinking, like, devil's advocate and stuff, but I don't want to articulate those since that's what he'll use next time. So there is actually a better argument that Shahid could have made, but I'm not going to write his next idea for him, so I won't articulate it. But the one that he plagiarized about normalization, Matt, like, you're like me, and we want to disseminate our ideas and our work, and we want people to be empowered, but it can, and it's like, the beautiful thing about ideas is that, like, you have an idea, you have an idea, I have an idea, it doesn't work like money, like, if we each have $1 and we give each other $1, we each have $1. But if we each give each other an idea, we each now have 2 ideas. And, people like Shahid Bolson, when they are inspired or take ideas about how geopolitical dynamics work, and they kind of twist it on their head in service of empire, in service of this, or to be a convert to Islam, and then to marry a Palestinian woman, and then in addition to that, and then now to say that Israel should take it all, or that Palestinians should just surrender it all. I'm not saying that the Palestinians should not do that, Matt. I'm saying that it is absurd for anyone not there on the ground living it daily to say, I'm tired of saying what other group of people should carry the cross as an idealized people, as a noble savage, as like, we're not carrying that cross. Like, people are afraid that the IRS is going to go after them, and they dutifully pay their taxes on time, even though those taxes are buying the bombs that drop on the babies around the world. But they want Palestinians to live there while the bombs are dropping, or why you know what I mean? So it's a very difficult question. I'm not a moral authority. I'm only, you know what I mean? But it is.
No, absolutely. And if there is ever going to be, a resolution, at this point, I'm not persuaded that there could be a one-state solution for many, many generations, just because you can't build a nation with having this much atrocity and genocide committed from one fellow group on another neighboring group to this extent. There's going to take generations of economic development, cooperation, and slow healing before any type of dialogue like that can even happen, in my mind.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, totally. I appreciate all of those considerations. So let's get back on the list of people waiting. Matthew Thomas has been waiting for a while. Matthew, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay,
thanks,
go
Matt.
for it.
Joaquin, a couple of questions regarding going back to the Ukraine question, Ukraine and Russia, and then the possible path forward to peace, and with the context of Turkey, the recent meetings in Turkey in mind. Aren't there a couple of legal blockers, it's like really solid legal blockers, according to Ukrainian law, that prevents any kind of legitimate peace process from moving forward? One being I believe the Ukrainian parliament actually passed a law, I think 2 years ago, specifically prohibiting any Ukrainian citizen from negotiating with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. And that includes Zelensky, includes the office of the president. So that's one. And then there's kind of the elephant in the room, which is, whom would, if there was a peace deal or a peace negotiation process, whom exactly would Putin, or whom exactly would the Russians negotiate with? I mean, Zelensky is not actually the legitimate president of Ukraine. I mean, his time in office expired, and there's been no election. It's actually a violation of their constitutional. It's a violation of their constitution for him to continue to maintain this position in office.
Yes.
Aren't these some serious legal blockers to any kind of legitimate peace process?
Well, because Matthew, you are a sane and literate person that correctly interpreted the news about that law. Yes. However, you are not as creative or as coke-headed as Zelensky, my friend, because the way that Zelensky and his press team are now spinning this, that the law, of course, cannot apply to the president, because how can the president be above the Constitution, and how could the law be above the Constitution? And now their legal experts are in defense of Zelensky are saying, really, there was no purpose for this law at all, because you see, actually the law applies to everyone else. It doesn't actually apply to Zelensky. How could it apply to the president of a country when the Constitution and the law are above the president? You see how they're doing, they're just making an argument like, but it's not. You see what they've done there? It's actually nonsense. So they're saying, because we are a country of laws and not men, and because Zelensky is not above the Constitution empowers the president. And of course, the law cannot apply to the president. In fact, the law itself, we didn't really have to pass it. Why? Because the law applies to everyone but the president. But actually, unless the president has in the affirmative given you authority to negotiate with the Russians towards whatever end, it's obviously a violation of the law, like to conduct negotiations independent of the executive branch. So that's where they've landed on that. I know it's like, but wait, guys, didn't you just say that that's why you made the law? What they're saying, obviously, is that without the law, everyone is prohibited except Zelensky, but with the law, everyone is prohibited except Zelensky. And that's literally what they've said. I know I'm trying to, I mean, it is a joke, but it's not a joke that they've said this. And I'm trying to actually figure out, but it's absurd. So now,
so won't there be, I mean, I guess, and my last question here will be, I mean, the Russians and Putin in particular they're kind of sticklers for legal nuance.
Yes.
Will they be able to accept any kind of treaty or peace deal or legal document?
No, the Russians are totally bluffing. They've made proposals that everyone who's an expert and a mediator would objectively agree are reasonable, and yet they're far beyond what Zelensky could ever get his backers in the UN, in the EU, or among the far right in the country, or the people around him, really, the oligarchs, to support, given the success of their own money laundering and weapons for rip-off operation. They're kind of getting towards the end of their line, but they have there's no way out for them but in. So they're going to double down on prolonging the conflict, and that is what works for Russia as well. It's just very bad in the arena of PR for either side to seem like they're not interested in peace. Ukraine is not interested in peace because its leadership has been specifically bred, groomed, bought, and paid for to drive Ukraine into the ground. So they're doing their job. They are breaking Ukraine. They are doing their job. Russia obviously is not interested in peace at the terms right now because they haven't finished their job. Like, they feel like they're getting it done and moving forward. They're not the ones complaining about setbacks. They're not the ones saying that other countries need to give them more money to continue the war. They're not the ones talking about shortages of drones or artillery or men. They're being accused of not wanting to end something that they're doing well at the end of the day. And so you're right when you're right to point out, and this is why we wouldn't be on RT saying this or something like that. Like, Russia does not need to end this war. They need to finish this war. And so one should not want, things that one doesn't need, and that one should not want things that work against them. So what I mean is, Russia does not want to end this war, but the war is not a matter of want.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So we'll have time for a few more questions. I know your time is precious and it's getting late, so I've got here Monty, Carlos, Marty, and Jerry in that order. So, and then we'll probably wrap it up. So Monty, you still there?
Yeah. Thank you, Joaquin. Had a couple observations this week. I'd appreciate your comments on them. Number one, like Matt talks about in the mystery cults, and these rites of initiation for these mystery cults, to reach the higher levels, you have to pass a certain test. And I'm convinced is the same with the general staff and the Department of Defense. I had my experience in Vietnam with Westmoreland and the body counts, and I was in Iraq, Afghanistan, and witnessed Petraeus and so forth. But one thing that jumped out at me this week, which didn't grab too much attention, but it's I think is indicative of the psychopaths we got in the top general staffs in the United States. General Ben Hodges, following just prior to Victory Day
He's a favorite
parade,
of ours. He's a favorite of ours, Ben Hodges. Sorry, continue.
So just before the Victory Day parade, Zelensky came out and was talking about attacks, on Moscow, and that he couldn't guarantee their safety. And of course, these long-range missile strikes that he was promoting would have required intelligence from the United States and NATO and so forth. And immediately after that, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was a former U.S. Forces European commander.
That's right.
He came out on mainstream media and made a statement explicitly that he saw the Victory Day parade as a legitimate military target. I mean, that is psychopathy. And
Yes.
I'm wondering just how it is. There's no pushback of these sons of a bitches, and they can get away with that with no pushback, and it's just accepted. Now, they'll go after Jim Comey, right, for seeing seashells on a beach as a threat against the president. But here you have a three-star general, basically given the green light or trying to promote an attack on the Victory Day parade with 29 heads of state there.
Yeah, it's particularly nuts because Ben Hodges has been promoted for the last couple of years through primarily USAID projects like Radio Freedom and Radio Free Europe. And he's been all over all of the Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian YouTube interviews for the whole duration of the conflict, all over Ukrainian Telegram. They have versions of his interviews, and he's doing stuff for the past couple of years, like we said, with a lot of different outfits. Sometimes the people interviewing him are Ukrainian military in uniform. A lot of it, like I said, is Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe. And he's been out there for a long time promoting their suicide cult. Like he said back during the Ukrainian spring offensive of 2023, was it? The spring offensive that started on June 4th. So it was summer, but like we say, it was the June 35th offensive and the May 35th offensive. They began to lose the thousands of guys a day. I mean, it was maybe 5,000 guys a day. It's on a couple of days in a row there. They couldn't punch through in Zaporozhye the way that they needed to. They couldn't get more than a few kilometers in, and they needed to punch about halfway through the whole oblast so that they could suppress the road along the south, right? So they could actually suppress the supply line, the Russian supply line along the Crimean, along the Azov and Crimean coast. So they were trying to get in there. They lost tons of equipment, all these Leopards and Challengers. It was this guy, it was this crook that was on those Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty YouTube channels being cited by Ukrainian media as like a credible, legitimate, this is the former US commander of all Europe forces, guys. This is a 3 or 4-star general, retired, right? But this is top brass in the US, and he's saying that you guys can succeed and keep at it. Like, they knew 5 days in that this was a non-starter, and they kept at it for how many more weeks? And all that news about, oh, they're going to get a toehold in this place, it never happened. It never got the toehold. I don't know how many, they lost 50 or 70, 80,000 guys. They repeated with a little bit more success in Kursk, but they wound up with the same defeat in the end. Another 80,000 guys, whatever, 200, 300 tanks, 2, 3, 4,000 IFEs and APCs. Really, really intense. And it's this guy that was promoting that these were viable, that they could succeed, that you ought to do them, So when it came to Victory Day in Russia, now we had people from the SBU speaking, again, in interviews, translated, oftentimes like Ukraine Leaks or something like that. We'll translate it on Telegram. And these guys are saying things like, we have the means to attack Russia on Victory Day. We could definitely hit Red Square. We could definitely do it. But because there's like a few other heads of state there that would cause like I think because the Chinese were there, basically, was what he said without saying it. Because I don't know of another, they wouldn't care if they hit Vucic or something. They wouldn't care. Maybe they wouldn't want to hit Aliyev or something. You know what I mean? But I'm just trying to think about who they would care about, who they would hit. But it was articulated anyway that just this arrogance, though, that like they could do it, but almost out of their own magnanimity that they're not going to do it. It's like, y'all are losing this guy. Your army is ready to break at the front line, and but they keep this like law of attraction, like the secret, like just talk like you're winning. So that's but this guy is a total. I've noticed him too. I mean, personally, I think good. Let him keep flapping at the gums, because it allows you to know like what he's a good source of knowing what is going on in the mind of Yermak or Zelensky in terms of what they're promoting in Ukraine. Because if you don't speak Ukrainian, or you don't get like a lot of good translated little bits from the Ukrainians, he's a very good way to know what Ukrainians are being fed inside of Ukraine about how successful this or that operation is going to be. Especially like we said, like the spring or summer offensive a couple years ago, Kursk, he said that was going to be a super good idea. Remember, he said that Kursk was going to work out, that they might even dig in further, that they could encircle Belgorod, that they could exchange Crimea, they could exchange Donetsk for Kursk or something. I mean, he really was sold as a true believer in Ukraine's abilities, but I think he's been grifting the whole time.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to that, I was somewhat astonished at Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia on his recent trip, where he called out by name the neocons and the so-called nation builders that basically come in and destroy things. And I thought that was rather significant pushback. I would like to know who wrote that speech for him, but your comment on that.
Yeah, no, Trump is going to say a lot of things one day that we like, and a lot of things we don't like the next day. And he's doing his whole theatrics and his whole operation. He's trying to soft sell different things. And I think mostly what I've had to come to realize about the complexity in human relations is that politicians lie. And sometimes and what's happening a lot, interestingly, in different parts of the world, at times with Trump too, is that they're lying, but they're lying to the people that should be lied to. They're lying to the people that need to be told some bullshit story to whatever. There was a really weird thing that he said also about Iran, which was that that it was almost like we're in a simulation and Iran is just a kayfabe enemy that social forces use as traction to get things done, like this kind of this other, and he was like being very philosophical. I was like, he was just saying like, the other is an abstraction that humanity uses to motivate and essentially organize its forces of action or something. I don't agree with that philosophically as a goal, but as a realist description of human history, like he's not far off the mark with that. And like I said at the time, you know, it's a very good question. Like, we live in a new day of diplomacy where these people can talk and speak candidly and build rapport, and they can it's the level of discourse has elevated to the point where you have people in a room that are negotiating, representing the country's national interests, and there's an understanding that that the people in the room are not extremists, they're not the personalities, they're just representatives of a state. And it's almost like in that old Twilight Zone episode where everyone just appears, they're like in some white room, like with white all around, and it turns out that they're all dolls, and they're like, it's some Salvation Army thing, that they're actually dolls in a bucket. It's just kind of like the throneness of the situation, right? This kind of existential crisis of humanity, and you get leaders in a room together the fourth wall has come down. They're totally talking directly to the public, and they're able to speak to each other about the circumstances that we find ourselves in. It's like, you can imagine, see, you're 2025, you're like somebody, Witkoff or Rubio, and you're talking to the Iranians, and it's like, we can't even articulate what makes you bad or wrong. Like, we don't even, there's nothing that we can actually say that you've done wrong or is wrong, but the inertia of our histories has brought us to this point. Like, our system is arranged on, you guys play the role of the bad guys. Your system is arranged on, and probably right, that we've been pushing on you, but that's your narrative too. And you need that. Like, what would happen if Iran didn't have an enemy in the United States? Like, what would happen if Iran didn't have an enemy in Israel? Well, there'd probably be a bigger focus on wealth redistribution and inequalities within Iran. It's not the worst country, but there's always room for improvement. And, you know, having the great Satan be out some other, like, legitimizes, like, there are a lot of people in Iran that maybe their income or their access to opportunities isn't where it should be, but they believe that the reason that they don't have those is because of a conflict with the West. And oftentimes they're right, but it also disguises the class structures of their own society. I mean, there are Iranians that are multi-billionaires that are in Iran, and they're not mullahs, they're not in the government, they're just important people. They have oligarchs in Iran. They're not in power politically, but they have financial oligarchs in Iran that are private owners of capital, big time. They can invest. There's rules on where the money is and things like that as Iranian nationals, and of course they're subject to the sanctions. But yeah, you can. Anyway, it is where we are. You know, the things that Trump says, you know, are so bizarre and unpredictable at times that I've learned it's not necessary to speak to everything that he says, because in a week, 2 weeks, or 3 months, typically things work out. Like, you see what it was that he was saying. It's usually something that, and it doesn't mean he was right, but typically the criticisms about why he should fail, or that it should fail, or that he fucked up or will fuck up, they tend to evaporate more than not. I don't envy the man. I don't envy the position. I think the United States has like overly invested in so many messed up projects that have their own inertia, budgets going for years, the whole deep state. Like, it's beyond my comprehension that the direction the United States was headed on in the post-Cold War moment in the 1990s, you know, unipolarity and the culture of victory, you know, that kind of triumphalism of American supremacy that was expressed in this kind of soft-pedaled social democratic globalization language. all of that was an ideological construct that was meant to normalize where the center of the world is and who dictates norms. It was the collective West. So Trump is a conundrum. You know, he's a riddle wrapped inside of a mystery, wrapped in an enigma, and so forth, right? But people have accused him of so many things over the years. Like there's so much legitimate criticism of U.S. policy that he is in charge of ultimately and responsible for. But the criticisms that tend to be amplified in media tend to be going to this point of absurd reduction of, you know, therefore Orange Man bad. Not here's 6 things that he did good, here's 5 things he did bad, and what does that mean about the state of American power? Not like Trump, the personality, like, you know, we're talking about the direction of the American system and how it's recalibrating in light of multipolarity, you know, and Trump, art of the deal, the whole sales is like to make losing look like it's winning. It's like, in other words, it's like, instead of saying we can't afford to maintain our empire anymore, why don't you say something like, we're sick and tired of being so friendly and generous with countries that don't give us anything back. Like, we're not going to do that for them anymore. It's like, that's a funny way of saying that you're losing the empire, you know, but that's how you would spin it. Like, think about all of the voters, the low information voters. It's a very strange distribution. Like there's very strange, obviously, like people know, like, you know, that I have said Trump is a better president than Biden. People have said that, no, I've said that Trump would be a better president than Biden and that Trump would have been a better president than Clinton. And I think that Trump was a better president than Obama. Those are not very high hurdles to clear, though, just to understand. Like, you know, just so, though, but in fairness, and from when I was born, he is the best president, American president in my lifetime. It doesn't mean that he's transformed me or I'm, you know, that it's not some ray of light or something. He's not my religion. I'm just objectively aware that so many of the problems that were part of the American trajectory, like embedded institutionally, you know, like migration, like the rhetoric and the social forces that he's amplifying in that direction, to me, like, are not from my people. You know what I mean? It's not my flavor. It's not my sauce. It's not what I want to simmer in. You know what I mean? It's not what I want to cavort with. You know what I mean? Like, as a Mexican American, like, it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of clear to me. Like, I grew up, I knew what was going on in fucking Orange County. I knew what was going on in fucking Simi Valley. I knew where all the fucking gringos were with like their Dixie flags and, you know, German crosses. And, you know, I knew the whole bikers scene out there and the, you know, high desert and the Inland Empire and all that. Like, no effing way. So I know where a lot of this nativism is weaponized. So that, to me, is like, I don't like the language, but I know objectively a country has to have a limit on how many migrants come in. So what is that number? Has anyone ever articulated a number or what the goal of it is? Like, if the goal is like crisis, the world's a crisis. If the issue is poverty, let me introduce it to 5 billion people living in poverty. Can we put them in the United States? Like, is that even how this works? No. So there's a lot of things that are like, I see that they're getting done and I separate it from the rhetoric. And then other things I'm like, this is irretractable direction of American power. You know, like America got welded to Zionism and you're not going to unweld. It's like a, you know, something from The Thing or something. It's like a sci-fi thing. It's a melded monster, got 2 heads, the arms are all everywhere. United States and Zionism are like, rah, like this. Ah. So you're not going to have an American president that can undo that without the whole species exploding. And I don't blame, you know, the old school communists or the Iranians for wanting that to happen. Like, I don't blame them from their point of view. As a person where like that's not true anymore. So much of my family lives in the United States. You know, I don't want bad things to happen. Like, people I went to school with, people I grew up with. you know? They're human beings. They're not more or less deserving than anyone anywhere else in the world, and they're not the reason for the problems in the world. It's not American people. So I like this not blaming American people, and I like this not blaming white people thing that some people like Trump around. Like, I totally understand that the politics of that. Like, I'm so sick and tired of the Democrat race politics and all of this stuff. It's a racket, you know, and it's dehumanizing and demeaning to us Latinos as well. It's beyond. Anyway, it's like they talk about getting off the plantation, and we talk about getting off the hacienda, you know, the Democrat hacienda, because they have their own little game, their own little ways of in group and out group, and who's downing up and who's browning up and all this shit. So it's they made promises for decades and generations and never ever even got close to fulfilling them. And back when the newspaper was like low resolution, it can just say, oh, it was defeated. But when like C-SPAN came out and people started looking like, wow, these fuckers are voting for the thing they just said that they were against. Like, these saying we just elected them and they're voting for it. Like, when C-SPAN came out, that, like, you would have thought that would have been the revolution, but then you're like, oh, wait a minute, 90% of people asleep, you know, or 60 or 40, I don't know. I'm not a pessimist, but too many people, you know? And I don't even know to the extent of human horizons, like to what extent we can even, you know, how far that goes. Because there's like, I think we haven't hit our horizons or our best, but there's limits, you know, there's uneven distribution of talents in the population. So I'm worried if people, you know, but yes, Trump and the Saudis, the things he just said though were, I mean, you know, he said a lot of good things and a lot of scary things, frankly.
Okay, we got a two-part question from Carlos. Carlos, you still there? Yes, sir. Go for it.
Well, Interestingly, a lot of my perspectives would be to run through the questions in the very nuanced way that your question includes. So I find myself in agreement with your question, if there's such a thing. But I think that the strategy of globalism, which was contingent upon the division of Russia and or the capture of China, some combination, whatever, failed. In that model, though, while they believed it could succeed, globalization culture, there was a global division of labor, with increasingly the production and raw materials in the so-called global South periphery, so-called developing or third world, and then the core, so-called first world, northern, western countries, what have you, the international community having really a lot of the higher end production, high tech, but services and financial services. And they went in the direction of financialization of everything at a certain point in time. And a lot of people would say, like, from the 70s onwards, they were like locked into total financialization of the whole economy. Like even things that shouldn't be brought into the arena of speculation, those things were financialized. The fight in our lives today is over like water and rainfall. Like, are you allowed to collect rainfall, right? I mean, so those are important. Like, understand where we're at in this question, right? So I found that the ruling class in the West had to get into a big fight with themselves about which way forward. And it's not going to be a anarcho-libertarian, flat horizontal flattening of the society after some black swan event, coup, revolution, war. I mean, Lenin and Mussolini had in the time of World War I, like, concretize a lot of their thoughts around this war revolution thesis, that you have a war related black swan event, and then you have a revolution, because during these conflicts, all of the processes are sped up and all of the contradictions are banging against each other more loudly because the whole machine is under more pressure. So all the defects are more pronounced, and then the thing can come apart, like, right? So, and instead, like you're saying, and what I'm saying, maybe an answer or an agreement with your question is like, so what are the alternatives in the West for the United States? So you're going to need to get as much agreement among as many of the oligarchs as possible to move against their older position, which was contingent upon the financial services economy, globalization, which was the Washington Consensus, right? Which was the main idea was that for the foreseeable future, and if we can help it forever, like, the majority of all capital revenue streams were going to make their way back to the city of London and New York City, Wall Street and London. And if that was going to be the way it worked, we're going to call that globalization. We're going to have the It's a Small World After All, and all the Walt Disney stuff, and the Kumbaya, and the globo culture, and I want to teach the world to sing, and all this stuff, and that everything was going to be happy. So then, of course, we hit some weird problem 20 years ago, and the Russians weren't in line, and then within a few short years, Georgia failed to invade themselves, and then Russia came in to save the South Ossetians and Abkhazians. And ever since then, you've had like this more going in this, they failed to really, I said before that, and Matt's a much bigger expert on this question, but they failed to capture China, right? And then they failed to get Russia. So now they can't, this whole globalization scheme is not going to work. Again, that globalization scheme was based upon a global division of labor, with labor and raw material and manufacturing of many things happening in the third world, and then the first world being they were debating credit cards or universal basic income. That was like is it going to be credit cards? Is it going to be UBI? Is it a service economy? Is it a public sector? Is it welfare? Is it credit cards? How are we going to do it? So that's my sense of the history. And then Now they're like, wait a minute, we don't have all this power. We're not calling that we have enough prestige, status, nukes, the dollar, like it's customary because of its fiat and tradition that countries will hold it for country to country transactions, but they don't have to. And they're going away from it naturally, but just at the rate of custom and comfortability for both parties in agreement. This is either at the corporate, typically national level, but you have transactions occurring not in the dollar, and countries are balancing their profile of reserve currency holdings as well. And like, it's not that they're going against the dollar, but that a lot of them, like there's a lot of reports about like what China dumps or trade war stuff, but countries generally hold the dollars, but moving forward, they're like augmenting, or when they're purchasing like new currencies, these are like not non-dollar. So a lot of yuan, but others too could be interesting at a given moment. Like after Trump announced the huge tariff thing, I mean, the euro to dollar like went crazy. It went from, I think about 90, it went from about 95 or 96 euro cents to buy a dollar to 87. And it was the worst exchange of dollar euro for the dollar in 5 years or maybe 10. I remember in 2012 and 2013, it was very normal for the dollar to be, 118 or something. Like it would cost $1.18 to buy a euro. I remember that was the standard regimen to expect. I think I think it's gone more in the direction of being closer, like more in the direction of parity, like as a trend in the last 10 years. But ever since April 7th or something like this, or whatever it was, you can fact check the date, but whenever it was that Trump announced the whole tariff thing at first, that's when the euro and dollar like went totally, and it actually had such an effect. It had actually such an effect on the projected trade, because this is actually like, you think, oh, Europe wants a strong. Well, they're having a problem with Trump's proposed tariffs. Just understand what happened. The news of tariffs alone drove this difference between the euro and the dollar that effectively imposed a 10-cent tariff through the exchange rate difference on European export goods to the US. So that was effectively a 10% tariff just through the currency fluctuation that happened. So that hasn't changed. I mean, I think it's probably right now at 89 or 90 euro cents to buy a dollar right now. So it's recovered a few points, but it's not recovered. It's just a matter of perspective. I just say, like, it sucks if you have dollars and spend them in Europe is what that sucks. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. But most people don't feel the difference otherwise. It's very negligible difference. But I don't know. But it was a very good question that I agree with. Right. No, that, you know what? I know our time is short, but that's a very good point. And there were some Russian generals that blogged on Telegram about that themselves. They said this idea that at a checkpoint in Syria, that seeing the Russian flag would keep the Takfiris away, or it would keep HTS away, was a myth that we dangerously believed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How much time do you have left there, Joaquin?
Yes.
How much time do you have on your end?
Can I make a deal with you?
Yeah.
Give me 1 minute, and I can do give me like 1 minute. I'm going to turn my cam off. I'm going to see a man about a horse, and then I can take 3 questions.
We only need 2, but it's
and there we go. Then
Marty Seath. So that's going to be a big little exposition question. But yeah, okay, take a minute. Sure. Cool.
Yes.
Okay, I'll do the sideshow here. Okay. All right, you do your thing,
right.
Joaquin.
All right. I'll be right back
on. Yeah, I mean, Carlos, I share your trepidation, man. Obviously, I do, and like the way I've come to sort of try to formulate my thoughts around this vying for the new system and what the coloring of the new system is going to be is shaped in many ways by the fact that the two opposing or the controlled opposition types of systems that the oligarchy has been gaming up for the 20th century and would like to, either one is acceptable for the oligarchy, ultimately both lead to the same place, which is the Brave New World sort of system, homogenized, Aldous Huxleyan type of system that was their ideal. That's the preferred best case scenario. If you're an oligarch, that's like the best system of control where all of the slaves adore their shackles because the drugs, the soma, everything is just so self-reinforcing as an ecstatic drug that they just want to be the best expression of their caste that they could be under an alpha plus genetically bred transhumanist aristocracy, right? So that type of woke sort of that sort of represents, I think, the Francis Fukuyama, the thing that was being pushed heavily from 71 especially onward was really that, and with the 1991 end of history doctrine. I mean, Francis Fukuyama was a follower of Aldous Huxley, right? That was like the celebration that, okay, that's the game that won. That's the scenario that won. It's the best. The second best is the Orwellian, dividing the world by might makes right controlled dictatorships to jurisdictionally manage the local herds in a system that's a little bit more of a hard tyranny, like a more of a you can really feel the chains, right? It's more brutalizing, and that's the second best. But both of them are rooted in the exact same axioms that human beings must be ruled by some elite transhumanist clique to impose their will onto the masses. So both of them are like ultimately Hobbesian, but seeming oppositions, right? The what falls out of play, and I guess that's my concern right now, is that it does seem like within the transatlantic world, I'm a lot more confident that amongst the Eurasian powers, especially China, when I've spent a lot of time studying and mapping out the origins, the roots of the deep states enmeshment within the Eurasian cultures, and that's given me more of a sense of confidence that their deeper Confucian philosophy and the deeper orthodox values have done a really good job at organizing an intelligentsia that's been able to de-weed and push back against this transhumanist Orwellian fifth column operation within various countries of Eurasia. I don't see that same type of de-weeding qualitatively in the West, but I do still feel like there's a battle over whether the new system that comes online is going to be of that hardcore Orwellian or Coudenhove-Kalergi type of division of the world into jurisdictions, or whether it's going to be based upon the breaking of the rules, which is premised around the idea of a higher notion of win-win cooperation, non-zero-sum thinking in the true sense of the word, which premises an assumption that there is an intrinsic value on human life, human creativity, human minds that are always mandated to go outside of the limits to their existence by being creative discoverers and thus resonating ever more perfectly with God's creation. So I think that that's the more healthy tradition of what was once the USA a long time ago, and what I'm hoping still has some vibrancy to fight back against this thing you were alluding to, CJ, which is this transhumanist thing that I really don't trust at all. But I'm hoping that there's more vitality amongst Western patriots that are able to revive or express that better tradition that could then harmonize with Russia, China, and other nations that don't want to go the death cult route. So that's the way I'm thinking about the battle lines in that sense. I don't know if you heard any what I said there, Joaquin, but that was my waxing.
I caught half. So, but I don't know what the question was.
I was chiming in on how I share many of CJ's concerns, right? About, you know, the more nefarious idea of solving the or creating a new system founded upon a more.
Oh, yes. I caught that on my way out. That part. Yes, that was a very good.
Yeah, that transforms the MAGA, or tries to capture the MAGA and patriot movements of the West and turn it into something that would endorse something bad, ultimately, to say the least, right? So that was just my concern, my hope that there's a legitimate, healthy fight that can take that energy and put it into something more positive and constructive for the long-term survival of the species. So
yes.
Yeah. All right, so we got time for Marty and Jerry. Marty, are you still there?
Yeah.
Martin Seif.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. Again, first of all, Joaquin, thank you. We're indebted to you again. I mean, I'm very conflicted whenever you speak because one learns so much. It's a masterful presentation. And the reason I'm conflicted is I agree with everything you say, and I wish I didn't, because the picture is so depressing. And I wish the picture either was not depressing, or I wish I could fiercely argue, no, you have to get it wrong here, you must be wrong there. But no, that's what makes it so frightening. You're right, and it's very clear that you're right. So what I have to say is not anything central to be either arguing or debating with you or bringing up major new points, but